A deadly and beautiful lich? Well, yes, but do not be fooled. Her grace is but a guise, her charm a mere charade. She is a lich of allure and deceit. She is the Bronze Lich Lady. Right now, on Riches and Liches. Welcome adventurers, scholars, and world builders. I'm Rich, and this is Riches and Liches, dedicated to dungeons, dragons, and tales of lore. Today we continue the story of Lady Osterneth, also known as Opal, the Lich Lady Osterneth, and the Bronze Lich. While one might view the limited amount of canonical lore available as an insurmountable challenge for an in-depth profile, others, such as myself, relish the more obscure target, as I'm eager to fill in the gaps with creative and complementary homebrew in order to take an already excellent outline for a unique named lich and make it truly unforgettable, a set piece for an encounter or an entire campaign at your table. I provided some examples of that in our Volume 6 story narrative that we will expand upon today. As our journey continues, purists need not worry, as I will clearly demarcate the canon from the homebrew, which mostly resides in its own chapter of this volume. But if you're a fan of the homebrew, I really think you're going to enjoy today's creations. Okay, quite possibly my favorite creature type in all of Dungeons & Dragons, anytime we cover the Lich, is time well spent, and this one should be fun. Before we get started though, the obligatory ask. If at the conclusion of this video you think I earned it, please like and subscribe, and check out the links in the show notes if you'd like to support the channel or join our totally free Discord server where you can pitch show ideas and meet some truly spectacular fellow lore sages. Thank you. And now with no further delay, come on now, give me some credit. I am getting quicker. We continue our iconic lore series on the Lich. Volume 7, The Bronze Lich. We shall start our discovery with the known facts, as meager as they may be. Present only in the 4th edition and introduced in the Open Grave resource book, the canonical lore on the Bronze Lich is limited yet useful. Lore and insight Lady Osterneth works tirelessly to keep concealed. The Lady Osterneth grew up as a child of nobility in a forgotten kingdom in Eberron, and upon reaching maturity, the young maiden was married off to the king of an allied nation in a marriage of convenience and peace. Her new husband, however, was heavy-handed and cruel, and she suffered quietly through his abuse and humiliation. Unknown to her husband, though, the lady had secretly acquired skill with arcane magic under the tutelage of the king's covetous brother, who himself was a wizard of the court, likely the first seed of her seductive powers. Beautiful and charismatic, she quickly mastered court politics and the art of persuasion and influence, bringing many nobles and aristocrats into her fold. Her laughter was infectious and her smile disarming. Everyone delighted in her presence, except of course the king, who became increasingly callous and ill-tempered in her presence. When possible, Lady Osterneth escaped the spying eyes of the king's court by slipping out of the castle to masquerade as an adventurer of burgeoning arcane talent. As recounted in our Volume 6 tale, everything changed for her the day she and her companions stumbled upon the cult of Vecna, who at this point in history is still a new god. It is here that the story becomes shrouded in what-ifs and maybes. We're told she came upon the cult of Vecna and that her friends were slaughtered while she was spared. Did Vecna sense something in her and take an early interest in the would-be lich, or is this a grand embellishment that is really left for you to decide? We also know that within days of her returning home after her torture at the hands of this cult, that the previously healthy king grew very ill and soon died. Again, we're left to our own narrative here, but we don't need much of a logic leap to connect some obvious but also circumstantial dots. We know the king was certainly cruel to her, and there was never any real love between the two. She also had begun to acquire, maybe even master, some form of arcane magic, and was likely influenced by Vecna's dark corruption during the extended time she was held captive by his cult. And of course, she has much to gain by the king's death, namely the throne. Regardless, his death meant she was no longer abused at his hand, which itself seems like strong motivation. I think the only question is not if the king was poisoned, but if she did it herself, or if it was perhaps an agent of Vecna. I tend to lean towards the latter, as that way Vecna gains more leverage. At this point, we know she becomes queen, but devotes herself far more to acquiring and advancing some necromantic powers than actually running a kingdom, where she eventually unlocks the secret to lichdom, likely with Vecna's assistance. It is during this time we're told that she seeks and wipes out the cult that captured her. Was this simply for revenge, or was she drawn there unwittingly by a dark power? Or perhaps this was all at Vecna's instruction. Regardless, she acquires Vecna's heart and thus completes her forever devotion as the Lich God's servant. During this time, her kingdom is captured, but some years later in the aftermath, she emerges as the Bronze Lich. The canon really leaves us with just a few scant lines telling us that she raised legions of undead to reclaim her land, leaving her a queen of a kingdom in ruin. Her transformation complete, the former noble lady emerges from her lair amid the ruins of her former kingdom as the Bronze Lich Lady Osterneth. But ruling an unknown kingdom in a faraway land now seems trite. Her master, and by proxy herself, have far grander goals. Canonically speaking, the Lich Lady Osterneth is described as, quote, the mightiest of servants to the Lich God Vecna, which in and of itself does say a lot about her esteemed power. While in my opinion we do need to look at all 4th edition canon with critical and logical eyes, especially if it's not something that's been carried forward, she is a named Lich, meaning there exists only one of her. So while I do think it's fair to cast doubt on her status as the mightiest of Vecna's servants, regardless, as a unique named Lich, she is and should be leveraged as a far superior challenge to that of the run-of-the-mill Lich. Now, given that a bone stock Lich is already pretty deadly, I must concede that proper context is required if we're going to add any benefit, the value of which will revolve around how we world build and implement the Bronze Lich as that far superior challenge. Every Dungeon Master is a little different, but in my view, what makes her far superior is not necessarily her offensive or direct damage spell abilities, but more so her ancillary mechanics, her dedicated minions, the environment in which she operates, the lair actions, even her stylization, something I'll attempt to outline here in just a minute. But before I do that, I think we need to make a few things clear about the Bronze Lich. In my research outside of the sourcebook, I noticed some confusion on the very nature of the Bronze Lich. You see, Lady Osterneth is not a unique named example of a Bronze Lich variant type. No, she is in fact the Bronze Lich. There are no others. I mean, you can certainly change that at your table if you prefer, but to ensure you correctly understand the intended canon, there's only one Bronze Lich. Also, while you're likely well aware of the Hand and Eye of Vecna, as they are two of Mr. Gygax's earliest ever artifacts, created in fact at the dawn of Dungeons & Dragons, Vecna's Heart, on the other hand, as yet another powerful artifact of the Lich God, was created solely in the 4th edition and has not been expanded upon since. So, keeping all of that in mind, let's profile the Bronze Lich. Despite my earlier casting of doubt around the 4th edition and its crowning the Bronze Lich the title of mightiest of Vecna's servants, I actually really do like the Lich Lady Osterneth as a unique and layered take on the Lich as a creature type, and I do so for a couple of reasons. First, mechanically. Make no mistake, while the Bronze Lich certainly prefers to work under the cover of illusion and subterfuge, to the unwary, that really only works to give a false sense of confidence, because the Lich Lady's pretty deadly. Yes, of course she has far more base health, is a far more powerful spellcaster, and she has an arsenal of necrotic ranged attacks and auras, not to mention not one, but 2 charms, as befitting her character. But her signature characteristic, the defining ability, and decidedly unique flavor of the Bronze Lich, is her Soul Gem ability. With this mechanic, the Lich Lady possesses these soul gems, or soul cages really, that hold the spirits of her past victims. Holding up to 3 souls each, the gems are inset, embedded directly into her bronzed bones. During combat, the Lich Lady can use an action to release a single trapped soul from one of these gems to regain health. And I can think of a few cool mechanics we could certainly homebrew with these soul gems. But long before we get to that, a word of warning. If you ever face this Lich in combat, you would be well advised to already know the location of her phylactery, because if you are fortunate enough to defeat her in battle, as the unique and far more powerful named Lich that she is, the Lich Lady reforms not in the standard 1d10 days, but in 24 hours, on the dot. Somewhat odd, the official canon does not, at least that I could source, name her phylactery, but that's something I'll correct in our homebrew section. While there is certainly a lot to like and build upon in terms of her mechanics, it's stylistically where I think the Bronze Lich really helps to bring dimensionality to an otherwise pretty well-worn path of Lich encounters. Lady Osterneth's demeanor is wholly unique, especially for a Lich, which is one of the reasons I think she makes for a potentially great central villain. As a loyal agent to Vecna, she's tasked with subversion and corruption on the material plane through her demurred grace as well as her dread, the proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing approach, all to further the Lich God's own sinister goal of complete and total domination of worlds. To that end, the Lich Lady prefers to work her nefarious plans while hidden in plain sight, through her own aristocratic charms, a shadowed network of sinister agents, and if necessary, her undead and subjugated minions, but almost always leaving direct combat as an absolute last resort. In fact, as I was doing my research for this profile, I found the Bronze Lich has many parallels to that of the Harvester Devil, using charm, intelligence, and the art of manipulation to do their greatest work, leaving the actual dirty work, getting their hands dirty, to their agents unless absolutely necessary. While the Bronze Lich is significantly more powerful than the Falxagon or Harvester Devil, if ever direct engagement were required, I could definitely see these two sharing notes, swapping war stories of manipulation and influence through the use of charm and deceit. Lady Osterneth is able to excel at high-level subterfuge and manipulation through one of her greatest powers, the strong ability to maintain her magical visage of graceful beauty and youth, despite being, a lich. Rarely letting her true form show, even in combat, she appears to most as a beautiful, alluring, and aristocratic young human female of charm, grace, and intelligence. Her countenance of an eternally youthful, dark-haired noblewoman in her late 20s with bronze skin is the magically held illusion of her former self, a time before her dark transformation so many centuries ago. So how is this deceitful presence of youth and beauty maintained? Well, the eyes have it. Ablaze with prismatic radiance, they are the secret power that creates her powerful illusory effect, hiding her true appearance from all but her most trusted servants. While her innate and almost ever-present illusion magic will allow her to take on the appearance of any small or medium humanoid, the lady's chosen look is that of demure aristocracy, varying as needed to suit her needs and goals or the known desires of her target. But generally, she prefers to maintain the core attributes of a dark-haired beauty, projected with an emphasis on a rich wardrobe and an elegant smile that melts men's hearts and belies her deeply sinister intents. Claiming nobility from an obscure, distant land, the lady has mastered the art of using her guile and charisma to disarm her target, gaining trust, desire, and favor among the many scions and influential of high society, as well as the rigid patriarchy of kingdoms, governments, and even the military. With their interest piqued, she then takes her direction from the Whispered One himself. By leveraging her deceitful powers of seduction on the realm's great leaders, with the singular goal of corruption, she's very effective in bringing these victims willingly into the worship and service of Vecna. Remember, when dealing with the Lich Lady, beauty really is only skin deep, and magically so. However, even in her unholy Lich form, she somehow still radiates the slightest aura of beauty, a hint and remnant of her former humanity. Before we jump into our homebrew section, I wanted to add this brief addendum, actually recorded separately, after reading some of the awesome comments and emails that I received regarding the Volume 6 story on the Bronze Lich. There were a lot of questions about the bard Koran, his role in my story, and of course, his ultimate fate. While ultimately that is up to each of you to decide and implement at your table, I would be happy to share my own version of those events. As you each know now, the Lich Lady is able to maintain her illusory visage at will, even during combat. This innate magic would allow her love for Koran to, at least on a surface level, appear normal. The Lady Osterneth, after all, is a lich who has mastered the art of subtlety and deceit, so I would not expect her to have any trouble maintaining this ruse. The real thrust of my additions to the story with Koran were to convey some form of semblance, if only a sliver of her humanity. She did in fact fall in love with the bard, and at least for a time, it was likely genuine. You see, your stereotypical lich, a power-hungry and accomplished caster who most often already has some strong evil tendencies, who then, when faced with their own mortality, more often than not willfully choose to take the evil path of lichdom, and doing so for 100% self-serving reasons. But the Lich Lady, while certainly not diminishing her as ultimately an evil being, does have some additional layers to add depth, including, potentially, her ability to love, if you believe the rumors. So, what happened to Koran? In my version of events, he lived and loved the lady for many years, growing old when she did not. He would have, of course, noticed this at some point, that he's growing old and she is still young and vivacious. Did he ever know she was a lich? Well, that's really up to you, and if so, how did he react? Perhaps he died in her arms of old age. Perhaps he serves her in his unlife. Perhaps voluntarily because he asked her, or perhaps not because she is an evil lich. Either way, I can tell you this: you can expect to see a future lich volume continuing the story of the bard lich, Koran. Now that you've gained some insight into Lady Osterneth, let's go full homebrew on her. I actually had a ton of ideas and a lot of fun customizing the Bronze Lich. She really offers a unique palette for homebrew. But with the Lich Lady being a unique named lich, as opposed to an innumerable variant, I wanted my homebrew to stay true to the canon we do have, as well as the story I shared in Volume 6, and be complementary and additive to her backstory. So today I have for you her lair with a custom low-effort riddle, 2 access mechanics, and an associated lair action, plus of course a phylactery with a special mechanic befitting the Lich Lady's Volume 6 story. Let's start with the lair. Drawing from our Volume 6 story, which I'd hardly recommend you watch if you haven't yet, Lady Osterneth lairs somewhere in her reclaimed land, amid her shattered kingdom, which you may choose to have in a particular state of decay, ruin, or even rebuild. To best accommodate my homebrew, I have her palace or castle rebuilt. This could be an actual restoration of the ruin, or as I have chosen, she has a powerful illusion spell hiding the true decayed nature of her kingdom. I even went as far as saying that the illusion is held through Vecna's power, since she is the mightiest of his servants. This will allow it to be a reasonably powerful illusion that is not held or concentrated on by the Lich Lady herself. Here in this visage of a restored kingdom, she rules again. Her undead minions hold the visage of human servants, nobles, and advisors. This will allow her to work her subterfuge with local lords, generals, and nobles when she's in her realm. Within the castle, I've created the Theater of Lamentations. A grand theater, ballroom, or auditorium just seems fitting for the elite social background that she wishes to maintain. As a lair, we don't want it to be too easy to find, so it appears as a normal but opulent ballroom where she hosts lavish parties and dances, luring her targets into her web of deception, where attendees are often charmed and manipulated into carrying out Vecna's bidding. But to access the actual lair itself, I've created some unique mechanics that I'll share. The party would need to enter the ballroom at a certain time on a certain evening, or maybe through a monthly phase of the moon. Of course, whatever you decide, there should be many avenues by which this information can be acquired by the party. Rumors are always a good start, truth seated among the false and embellished, perhaps a torn page from a book or tome. I would add both of those along with anything else, but in addition to that, I would write a song or a poem that hides the clues. Here's mine, feel free to use, alter, or ignore. In castle depths where shadows creep, lies the Lady Lich who never sleeps. With her ballroom veiled in gloom, unveiled by moon its crescent bloom. When twilight's shroud veils the sun's last flare, and the clock's hands point to evening's prayer. Her dance begins, her waltz of dread, in time with souls of countless dead. The tick-tock of a clock unseen, she waits for you at the stroke of 13. Yet venture forth with heed and care, dare you enter her ghastly lair? A relatively easy riddle to unravel, and intentionally so. Being stuck is no fun for anyone. So, during a crescent moon, which is any time the DM makes it so, at 1 a.m., assuming you don't have a homebrew time system in your world, one of these two mechanics that I created would be in effect for a set period of time, say 1 hour. The first mechanic I'm calling the last applause. At 1 a.m., the room fills with ghostly apparitions who are dancing to a lamenting tune. Then suddenly, the music stops, and each ghost turns to the party and begins a chorus of ghostly applause, as though your party are the guests of honor. The party must then find a way to bow or curtsy in unison to open a portal or some other access to the lair that you as the DM would decide. The difficulty level of unraveling such a riddle should be based on your table and their love or hate for puzzles or riddles, which can vary wildly by players and is generally the most polarizing of the 4 aspects of Dungeons & Dragons gameplay. I would make it very obvious to my party that the ghostly audience are very happy you are there, and that the looks on their faces indicate that they're applauding and expecting some customary protocol to be complete. At that point, you can either make their acknowledgement of knowing that a bow and a curtsy is required be the entire check. That's successful. Or, if your party's not the puzzle-solving type, ask for a low insight check and tell them it's clear they are expected to formally acknowledge with a bow or a curtsy, and then you could ask for a performance check if you like. There's lots of ways you could make this not burdensome on the party, but still interesting and fun. I think it's important to have the failure chances pretty low, but if they do, the ghost could begin to throw projectiles at them, forcing them to retreat and try again in whatever next time window you've set up. If you wanted something a bit more mechanical, you could alternatively have the ghosts in a waltz when the party arrives. After a moment, drop a visual hint. For example, a certain ghostly figure steps out from the crowd, walks over to a party member, and beckons the PC to join them in a dance, maybe even extending their hand. And then you could have a standard dexterity check. Once the party gains access to the lair, and before they encounter the Lich Lady, I would have a few moments where the room can be described in elaborate detail. The party finds numerous keepsakes and mementos strewn about the lair, all painting the picture of her passion for her long-dead true love to the bard Koran, as described in Volume 6. Poems, song sheets, maybe even some drawings or paintings. And of course, I would really highlight his loot. Perhaps it's encased in an opulent display case. After all, this is now her phylactery. If you were paying attention earlier, you know that the Lich Lady will reform in 24 hours of her demise, as opposed to the standard 1d10 days for a bone stock Lich. So I wanted the phylactery to be easily accessible by the party in the event their gods smile upon them and they're able to defeat her in her lair, because they may need all 24 of those hours to unlock the secret of her soul-storing loot. Destroying her phylactery will not be as simple as doing a Pete Townsend and slamming the medieval guitar against an on-stage amp. Legend. But more on that mechanic in a moment. First, let's add a lair action to help the Lich Lady defend her lair. The Cruel King's Memory. Lady Osterneth summons her cruel former husband, the king, whose decayed and ghostly form attacks and taunts her enemies with insights into their own fears and regrets. So, in addition to physical attacks, you could perform some checks that force the party to attack the king if failed. And let's not forget, she'll have other minions as well. That's kind of her thing. So the idea is to make getting through and to her an obstacle for the party. However, assuming the party is successful in defeating the Lich Lady, or if she retreats without the loot in her possession, we can now deal with her phylactery loot through a mechanic I created in order to destroy it. I call it the Song of Souls. The loot is otherwise indestructible, but its strings are made of soul fibers from trapped spirits. Breaking the strings on the loot will release the spirits and thus destroy the loot and her phylactery. But to break each string, a member of the party will need to perform the playing of a mournful tune on the loot. An important note here, since we're not creating an entire campaign together, as a practice of good world building, while you cannot predict the actions of your party, you can most certainly establish a trail of hints leading up to this encounter that are both clear and obvious in hindsight. In doing so, starting very early in your adventure, culminating with some level of understanding before the party even seeks out the Lich Lady's lair. The party will miss clues, that's going to happen. They'll take paths you thought impossible, and generally just continually surprise you in their approach. And that's not only okay, it's one of the things I love most about being a dungeon master. However, even with that said, the mechanic challenge here could be as simple, again based upon your party's desires, as a simple wisdom check to understand the soul's plight and then a performance check to play the tune correctly. Failure to do so could enrage the trapped soul, initiating a combat, and that combat should be far more intended to waste time than to actually cause any real harm to the party. If your table happens to really like the roleplay elements of the game, as does mine, then the Bronze Lich also presents some great potential given her backstory that I've shared in these last 2 volumes. And it's here that her true uniqueness can really be leveraged. All these remnants of her past, the poems, keepsakes, her former lover's loot as her phylactery, they all speak to some shred of humanity that still remains within her. How much is up to you, but perhaps she cares about that loot as much or more as a function of its sentimental value, her reminder of what she used to be and what she was able to feel as a lich. Is she 100% pure evil? I mean, I'm pretty sure we're extending beyond the borders of her designers, but hey man, what's canon at your table is what your table decides, and she might be able to be bargained with. The possibilities are pretty close to endless. Good time to have a bard with you, don't you think? The obscure figure of the Lich Lady Osterneth is both a captivating character and unique villain who provides an excellent tableau upon which to add your own colors, as I've done today. But I literally had a dozen ideas captured in no time thinking about this unique lich. She is a symbol of beauty, power, dread, and evil. She's able to exist among societal norms and yet work insidiously within them, thereby creating a complex lich of duality for your world. Her canonical lore, while brief, is one that intertwines the tragic with the dark, connecting her with nobility, allure, ancient necromancy, and of course, one of the most supreme evils in all of Dungeons & Dragons, in the lich god Vecna. All intended to inspire awe, fear, fascination, and even a modicum of sympathy and understanding for her path and plight. While starting down the well-worn path of the typical lich concept, a recurring theme of immortality at any cost, with the Bronze Lich, your world gains depth and layers to this established base by the manner in which that malevolence is rendered, along with an interesting backstory that can be leveraged and further built upon to add dimensionality. The noble Lady Osterneth's transformation into the Bronze Lich is neither the mere selfish descent into evil, nor a simplistic tale of revenge. It is an evolution of her character, wrought with tragedy, ambition, and an insatiable desire to transcend her mortal circumstances, along with a glimmer of humanity that allow her to be painted in many different lights and able to fulfill a multifaceted role in a campaign. It is in those finer details, her duality, and the facets of her character and associated lore that really define the Lich Lady Osterneth's uniqueness, helping her find a proper place in your world. And that concludes Volume 7 on the Lich Lady Osterneth. I hope you had as much fun watching as I had creating. If you'd like to support the channel, please check out the links below to our Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee donation accounts. Plus, how about you join our growing community of lore sages and scholars on Discord, totally free. Thanks for listening, and until next time, remember, the only limitation at your table is your imagination.